Okay, so the end of chapter 14. Let me see where we were. Okay, so let's just review. Remember, we're talking about the different levels of, we have the Tzaddik, the Rasha, the Beinoni, right? We have the Tzaddik, the inspired person, someone who's always inspired, just so in love with God, they don't want anything else. All they could think about is doing what God wants. And when they see anything that is indulgent or not godly, they're just appalled. They're just repelled. They're just like, I don't want that. I'm not interested. It's like they're always on a spiritual high. Then there is the Rasha, the person who gives in to temptation and gives in, and the compromised person, the person who's not always able to maintain the highest standards. And then we have the Beinoni, which is what most of this book is dedicated to, which is what we called the possible man. Somebody who, yeah, they're not always inspired, but somehow they manage to hold it together and constantly do the right thing. And we also said that Beinoni is not, before we give up and say, oh, impossible, how can I ever be so perfect? The idea of a Beinoni in the Tanya is not, I'm aspiring to become a level in which I will absolutely never, ever do the wrong thing. The idea of the Beinoni that the Tanya is telling us is trying to tell us, what are we aspiring to? I'm not aspiring to feel perfect. I'm not aspiring to always be inspired. But I also should not sell myself short and say, oh, well, since I'm not always inspired, I can't expect myself to always do, so and so. A person needs to look at themselves and their life one moment at a time, and at every moment, try our best to have a Beinoni moment. And that is to recognize that I may or may not be inspired right now, but I still am capable of making the right choice and doing the right thing. And the Tanya has given us various tools to do that. We spoke about trying to maintain, getting inspiration during prayer and maintaining that throughout the day. We spoke about the concept of recognizing that our mind is always able to control our heart, no matter how strong and passionate our heart's desires are. We spoke about, last time we spoke about this, a meditation where when we recognize that we really, really don't ever want to be disconnected. If we were to be given a choice right now, God forbid, with a gun to our head, convert or die, of course we'd say, I'm never giving up my faith, because we don't ever want to be disconnected. If I recognize every moment in time as an opportunity to either connect or not connect, then I realize that I can make that choice every moment. Why do I only have to wait for these extreme situations where it's like, give it up, or it's every moment? If I have a chance to do a mitzvah right now, I have a chance to choose connection right now. And just like I would choose connection over disconnection in an extreme situation, I can choose it in a situation that doesn't seem so extreme. At every moment, I have the ability to choose connection over a disconnect. Now, we're still talking about the Beinoni and talking about how it, how exactly it plays out. One of the things that chapter 14 really concludes a certain section before we move on to chapter 15. Chapter 14 is still laying out for us, what is this that we're aspiring to be? And it circles back to the very, very beginning of chapter 1. Some of you might remember, we started off the Tanya with a statement. We said that before a person's born, right at birth, the soul is approached by the angels, and the soul is made to take an oath. And the oath is, I will be a tzaddik, I will not be a rasha. Every single one of us took that oath. And this is also a good time to remember that the author of the Tanya tells us that taking an oath, the word shvua is also the same root as the word sova, satiated. Each of us were satiated with the potential. We were each given the full potential to be a tzaddik, to do our absolute very best. And at birth, or before birth, when our life was already laid out for us, and there's already a roadmap and a plan, our soul was given all the powers that it needs to get through our unique challenges in life. But now we circle back to that statement, and the author of the Tanya says, wait, something here is a little unclear. Our soul was made to take an oath. I will be a tzaddik. I will not be a rasha. Wait, that's a little redundant. Obviously, if I will be a tzaddik, then I will not be a rasha. If I'm going to be a great person, obviously I won't be an evil person. Why would the soul have to take a double oath? And anyway, didn't we just say that not everyone's capable of being a tzaddik? So what does that oath mean anyway? What was I set up to do when I entered this world? And at the end of chapter 14 is a very interesting explanation where the author of the Tanya says the words are very precise. A person's told when they're born, be a tzaddik. That means aspire to be a tzaddik. If you can, if you are one of those unique souls that were chosen for the role of being a tzaddik, being that person who's always inspired, then that's your roadmap. But even if you weren't, you should still aspire towards it. There still are elements of tzaddik that you can incorporate into your life, even if you're not going to be a complete tzaddik. And yet, don't be a rasha. Don't say, just because I was not cut out to be that person who's always inspired, therefore, forget it. I'm not doing this. Even if you can't be the ultimate tzaddik, you still cannot allow yourself to be a rasha. You still need to aspire for that in-between level, which is what the Tanya says is the Beinoni. Now, why doesn't it spell out specifically, I will try to be a Beinoni, instead of saying, I will be a tzaddik, I will not be a rasha? That we're going to get to in a minute. But for starters, the Tanya is telling us now, so here's the goal. Try to do tzaddik-like things, which we're going to talk about in a minute. But even if you can't be the ultimate tzaddik, because most of us can't, still don't be a rasha. Be a Beinoni. Try to be this Beinoni. What does it mean to aspire to have these tzaddik-like moments and tzaddik-like traits? What did we say about the tzaddik? We said that tzaddik is someone who's always inspired. The Beinoni is someone who's not inspired yet does the right thing. There is something in between. Just because I'm not always inspired, it doesn't mean I shouldn't even try to be inspired. Each of us can take a look at our lives and say, wait, let me work on getting myself inspired in this area, in this area, in that area. When I work to inspire myself to be passionate and caring about my Judaism, a lot of it will come easier to me. And I will never be a tzaddik. I will never be always in a state of inspiration. But it will be much easier and much richer Jewish life if it comes with a dose of inspiration. So in short, although we're not able to be what the Tanya defines as a tzaddik, the Tanya term of a tzaddik, which is someone who's always inspired, we need to know that we do need to aspire for inspiration. While yes, we keep saying that the Beinoni is someone who's always doing the right thing, always controlling themselves, true, but don't think that you're expected to have a dry Judaism that doesn't come with inspiration. You need to, as much as possible, work on being inspired. Study, learn, listen, meditate, so that you are able to infuse inspiration into your Jewish practice, even if it won't be something constant. Now remember, it's specifically this section of Tanya is the author of the Tanya is coming to answer a question that he's gotten so many times in so many different formats. And the gist of the question that came from so many different people, was, Rabbi, look, I'm trying to be a good Jew. I'm trying to do the right thing. I've been working on this for so long, for so many years. Why is it that no matter how hard I worked, I sometimes find myself dealing with almost very petty desires? I sometimes feel like I've gotten nowhere. I work so hard, I try so hard, I invest so much, and yet, I don't know, I would think that by now, after X amount of years of doing this Jewish thing, I'd be at a much higher level. Why is it that sometimes I feel like I'm still struggling to do basics? And so, as a reminder, the entire first 14 chapters of the Tanya, we're answering this by saying, well, let's get to know ourselves. If you're a person who's still struggling to always be inspired, clearly that wasn't your part of your mission was not to be a tzaddik, an always inspired person, because then you would have been able to achieve that. Most people cannot achieve the level of being always inspired. So most people, their life journey is to be an aspiring Beinoni, a possible man. That means that on an action level, I'm always trying to do the right thing, regardless of how I feel. But at the same time, comes chapter 14 to tell us, I'm always striving for inspiration. I know it won't be perfect. I know that today I'm going to be so inspired, and tomorrow morning I might wake up and not feel like doing any of it. But that's okay, because now I recognize that that's part of my journey. Meaning it's not that I'm trying to be inspired and I know I'm going to stay inspired. I know I will not stay inspired always. It's going to be a constant journey. I'm always going to be working on my inspiration and on doing the right thing, but I'm still always conscious of the fact that I need to do the right thing regardless of how I feel. I don't know if that was clear or if I kind of circled around a bunch of times, but you know, if I were to sum up where we got to, that's kind of where we end chapter 14. The bottom line is a Beinoni is something that's very possible for us. Every single one of us at every single moment and every single time we're making a decision, we can choose to do the right thing regardless of how we feel about it. At the same time, we took an oath, be a tzaddik, not necessarily become that ultimate perfect tzaddik, but aspire to live like a tzaddik, aspire to be someone who's inspired as much as you can. And still, it shouldn't be an if then. It shouldn't be like, oh, when I'm inspired, then I could do the right thing. No, I'm always working on doing the right thing. And simultaneously, I'm working on also being inspired, because we all know that it's not a full Judaism to just be doing the right thing and not feeling the right thing. Any thoughts or questions? Okay, so let me just make sure we didn't miss anything at the end of 14. So there's a story I heard from, I heard this from Rabbi Gordon in the name of his father, who said, talking about someone who gets really far and yet they sometimes still struggle with basics. So it tells a story of a guy who's walking with his father down the street. His father is a recovered alcoholic who's been clean for many, many years. And they walk down the street and they see somebody who's completely drunk, covered in like dirty clothes and vomit and like just looks awful. And the son says to his father, "Oh, yuck, Dad. Like, thank God you're like so far from that already." And the father looks at his son and says, "You don't even know how I wish I could be there right now." Meaning, yes, I've come clean, I've worked on myself, and I know I don't want to go there. But the desire to sink back into that is something that's very strong inside of me, even after all of these years. So the same is true with inspiration, meaning inspiration, what the Tanya tells us, is something we're always working on and we're always trying, but it's okay if if in the hour after I'm so inspired and on such a high, suddenly I'm struggling with something that I think I got over 5 years ago, 5 inspirations ago. Why am I still struggling with this? That's okay. That just means I'm a living, breathing human, and my goal in life is to work on being a Beinoni. I'm not trying to be a tzaddik, which is someone who's always inspired. My feelings are always going to fluctuate, and I have to keep working on it and keep working on it and keep working on it. But I'm totally human and totally normal if I'm not always in that inspired mode. Yes, Lorraine.
So from what you're saying, and I'm remembering pieces from last time, but it's like clicking different. What you're saying is it's okay to struggle because that almost proves that you're not the Rasha, because the Rasha wouldn't care that much. But the fact that you recognize that things are not, oh, yeah, that doesn't matter. Oh, that doesn't matter. Oh, I'm not, but you are constantly saying that doesn't need to matter. today I won't let that matter. You know, you're taking one tiny step in the right direction. That almost proves that you are that in between person.
I would say that you're that aspiring in between person, because the making it to the Beinoni is when I actually succeed in conquering my actions. That all the there's two parts of me. There's the conscious part of me, what I say, what I consciously actively think about, and my actions. That's the conscious active part of me. Then there's the subconscious. There's the part of me that just gets excited when it sees certain things, when it hears certain things, when I'm exposed to certain things, right? Sometimes it's positive things that I get excited and inspired by, and sometimes it's not great things that, talk to me. And the Tanya tells us, even if I manage to control my actions 100% of the time, my subconscious is not necessarily going to change. And that's perfectly okay. It is perfectly okay if I've reached a level where I am doing everything right and making all the right decisions all the time, yet I still really wish I can do whatever. I just don't do it. That doesn't mean, and that doesn't show anything negative about me. I'm not a bad or a lowly person because I, wished I can hurt somebody. I am a Russia if I actually go ahead and do it. But if I control that, even if I feel it inside me, I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. Now, that being said, I need to work on myself so that I do become a more refined person, so that I feel that less, and maybe I'm less likely to, wish I can do something awful to someone. And that's possible. I can work on it and I could get better at it, but I'm never going to achieve perfection in that subconscious area. Chapter 15, yes, go ahead, Harriet.
Okay, so we're talking about the garments, the thoughts, words, and deeds that distinguish between the Rasha and the Tzaddik.
Right.
Okay. And the actions of what we're doing. The relationship with, this is all to get closer to God and to do God's will. Is there a difference between the Tzaddik, who is up there being perfect, like the perfect child, I love you, and then there's the Beinoni, like I know you're really trying, and then there's the Rasha of like, I love you, even though, I'm like, because this is all about doing mitzvot and about relationship with God. And I just wonder if you're trying, if you're trying as hard as you can for who you are, how you came into this world, that you're like, I'm going to try to be a tzaddik, but I didn't get all of the tools that I needed. So given these tools, I'm doing the best I can. I'm just
So chapter 15 is actually really going to talk about the effort piece. So I think you'll get a real answer to that. But just to point out something that you said, our goal in all of this discussion, the Tanya really starts off with the question, not so much how can I strengthen my relationship with God, but how can I fulfill my mission? What am I doing in this world? What does God want from me? Right now, becoming closer to God is almost like it's a byproduct. It's part of the journey. When I work on doing what God wants, I am becoming closer and I'm feeling closer. But the goal in Torah and in mitzvahs is not become closer to God. It's do what you're here for. Where we talk, we have this discussion with the students when we do the Sinai Scholars course about, I'm trying to think of the terminology. It's, oh, wait, I got it. One second. It was purpose versus meaning. Oh, okay. Finding meaning in life versus finding purpose in life. A lot of people look for meaning in life. I want to make my life meaningful. And so we try to see, I'm in this life. This is who I am. This is what I do. How can I make it meaningful? Oh, I can volunteer here. Oh, I can do this. We try to find different ways of infusing meaning into our life. Sometimes we're more successful. Sometimes we're less successful. And in a way, meaning is very subjective, right? Because what's meaningful to you might not be meaningful to me. What's meaningful to the third person is not meaningful to the fourth person. The Jewish approach, Judaism doesn't talk so much about bringing meaning into our life. Judaism talks about purpose. Because ultimately, when I understand my purpose and I fulfill my purpose, it ends up being the most meaningful thing that I can possibly do. A great example for this is actually from we're getting very close to Purim. In the Purim story, there's a very great line there where Esther finds out about the decree against the Jewish people, and she's having this conversation with Mordecai through a messenger, right? And Mordecai sends a message to Esther, "You're the queen. Why don't you go and appeal to the king to take away this decree?" And so she sends back a message through the messenger, and she tells Mordecai, "Well, you don't know, this is a crazy king. If he hasn't seen someone in 30 days, even his own wife, he might just kill me. Like, I don't know if I can do this." And so then Mordecai needs to convince her. Now, if you think about it, he could have used a lot of very meaningful arguments to convince her. If we're going to take the route of leading a meaningful life, he had a lot of things that he could tell her, if you do this, you can save so many people. And just imagine what a big, how special it's going to be if you're able to help the people. And there's so many people relying on you. He didn't use any of those. What's the line that Mordecai tells Esther? He tells Esther, I don't have the exact quote, but
what if you were born
yeah,
for purpose?
The Hebrew is, who knows if this is not the purpose for which you arrived in this position. There's no flowery, meaningful inspiration. He says, Esther, this might be your life's purpose. And then what does he say? If you don't do it, God will save the Jews some other way. But you have a chance to fulfill your purpose. And that actually gets her to go ahead and do it. Now, of course, when I fulfill my purpose, there's nothing so meaningful as doing, knowing why I'm here and fulfilling that. That becomes so meaningful. It's no longer like a guessing game. But ultimately, the Jewish approach is, what's my purpose? And when I fulfill my purpose, that's the ultimate, most meaningful life. So back to what we're saying, the Tanya is telling us, what's the purpose? We came into this world, our soul was given an oath. What's the purpose? What am I supposed to be doing? Am I supposed to be always inspired? Am I supposed to kind of look back and kind of pick and choose what are the things I should get involved in, not get involved in? So that says, no, you're born a Jew. That means your purpose is to fulfill the commandments in the Torah. What's expected of you? You're expected to try your very best to fulfill as many of the commandments as you can. Are you supposed to always be inspired? No. You might sometimes be more inspired. You might sometimes be less inspired. You should work on being more inspired so that you can actually do this better. It's going to be very hard to fulfill all those mitzvahs without inspiration. And anyway, God wants your inspiration. That's going to be a later chapter also, where God wants your heart to be in it. He doesn't just want your empty actions without feeling and passion. But you need to work on your inspiration, but you're never going to achieve that. And that's okay. Don't despair. If you don't feel inspired and you're doing the right thing, you're actually fulfilling the exact purpose for which you came to this world, which is to do what God wants and to work on inspiration. And chapter 15, this discussion leads very well into chapter 15 because, some of this was said and some of you might be thinking, okay, always doing the right thing. That's harder for some people than others. I know some people who, you know what? They're just, the Tanya doesn't use this word, but I think if we translated the Tanya into modern day terminology, chapter 15 will say, what about someone who's just a born nerd? They are just studious by nature. They just really not very passionate. They don't have a lot of desires. They don't really care about material things. They don't care about having money. They don't care about having a beautiful house. They don't care about doing well and being successful. They don't have sexual desires. They're just, I don't know, they're just a nerdy geek who's like a bookworm and just wants to sit and learn and be studious. And it's very easy for them to be a Beinoni. So maybe they just got the better end of the deal. If what God's telling me my mission is to do the right thing and to work on my emotions, I may feel it, I may not, then sometimes it feels like, hey, that's not fair. Some people just have it easier to be a Beinoni than others. That's the main topic of chapter 15. But Lorraine, you had a question first.
So in the Esther story that you were just laying out, how could Mordecai have known her purpose? How could he have handed her her purpose? Isn't that your relationship with God?
That's such a good question. So Mordecai, the Chassidus explains that Mordecai was the tzaddik of his generation. Mordecai was not just another Jew. In every, like we said, that God puts in every generation, tzaddik souls. And the one of the roles of the tzaddik soul is to help connect and inspire all the other souls. And earlier on in Tanya, in chapter 2, it speaks about it pretty briefly, but it says that all the souls, all the souls are connected. All the Jewish souls in a generation are like one body. So you can't say that, one part of the body is, more important, holier than the other. I mean, we're all connected. We all need each other. At the same time, different parts of the body have different roles. The head of a body is very much needed to help support the rest of the system. The tzaddik souls in every generation, are kind of like the head. And they're the ones that help support and bring inspiration to all the other souls. So there's, since the beginning of time, Jews have always had this idea of respecting scholars, connecting to a tzaddik, being connected to a holy person, for just guidance and inspiration, but on a deeper level, yes, sometimes you need someone to help connect you, to help guide you. What is my purpose? Where am I going? And Mordecai was that for his generation, which is why if you look at the story, you see Mordecai was that lone voice who stood up and told the Jewish people, I know this party in the palace sounds really nice, but we're not supposed to be going. That's not our purpose. So yeah, that was a very good question. So chapter 15 starts off by telling us about a type of Beinoni, like we said, who seems to have it very easy. This person just has no major desires, is very, not excited, doesn't care about things that most people care about. Is that what we're supposed to be aspiring to? Being these very dull, people who are just not passionate and just very robotic and just ticking off all the boxes and doing the right thing, because anyway, it seems like my emotions don't matter so much anyway. I'm not supposed to always be inspired. So maybe it's just about being these very robotic people. So let's look at it inside. At least the beginning of it. I'm going to, sorry. Let me share my screen, chapter 15. Okay. I'm actually not starting at the very beginning of the chapter. I'm starting a few lines in. In the category of Beinoni, there are also two levels. Surprise, surprise. Are you surprised? We said there's so many categories in every type. This chapter tells us within the category of Beinoni, we also have two levels. One is he who serves God, and the other one is he who serves him not. Wait a second. How could a Beinoni not be serving God? Beinoni sounds like they're always doing what God wants. So the Tanya focuses on the word oved, serving. And the Tanya will say, the Tanya tells us like this. Someone who's a tzaddik, and this is a little bit of Hebrew grammar, you would call them an Eved Hashem, a servant of God, like the adjective. This person is a servant of God. Someone who's a Beinoni, they're not necessarily a servant. They haven't earned this adjective title because they're a work in progress, but they're someone who you would call who is serving God. They have the verb on them. They are constantly working on serving God. That's what a Beinoni is supposed to be. A Beinoni is supposed to be someone who's always working, right? Because if my insides are not necessarily perfect, then every step of my life trying to make a right decision is going to be actively me working on trying to do the right thing. So the ideal Beinoni is someone who's always serving God. Sometimes you have a Beinoni who seems to fit all the Beinoni check boxes, but they're not actually serving God because they're not really working at it. It just comes naturally to them. So let's read it inside. In the category of Beinoni, there are two levels: he who serves God and he who serves him not. Yet he who serves him not is not wicked, although he does not wage war with his evil nature. So this person is someone who is acting like a Beinoni. They're always doing the right thing, but they're not working at it. For never in his life has he committed even a minor transgression in the realm of negative commandments. He has also fulfilled all the positive commandments, which he was able to fulfill, including the precept of Torah study, which is equal to all the other commandments combined. This person's always studying Torah, always doing the right thing, never doing anything that God doesn't want him to do, to the extent that his mouth never ceased from study, despite the difficulty involved in this. Yet he is still described as one who does not serve God, for he does not wage any battle against his evil inclination. This is the way the Tanya describes what we would say the Beinoni nerd, the passionless Beinoni. This person does not wage any battle to vanquish it through the aid of the divine light that illuminates his soul, abiding by the brain. Sorry, I'm just going to skip ahead. For his evil inclination does not oppose him at all in an attempt to deter him from Torah study and divine service, and thus he need not wage any war against it. This is a person who, by nature, it's very easy for them to do the right thing. So it is, for example, with one who by his nature is an assiduous student due to his stolid temperament. Just that kind of person that likes to sit and learn and study all day, and who is also free of conflict with sexual desire due to his frigid nature. Just that kind of passionless person who doesn't get excited by things that other people get excited by. And similarly, with other mundane pleasures, he need not exert himself to master a desire for them, for he naturally lacks any feeling for enjoyment. When everyone else is excited about getting the latest car, the latest gadget, going on a nice vacation, this person just doesn't care for that stuff. It just doesn't talk to them. They're totally happy sitting all day, studying the books. Or similarly, with other mundane pleasures, okay, we just read that one. For this reason, he does not need to contemplate so much on the greatness of God to consciously create a spirit of knowledge and fear of God in his mind in order to guard himself from transgressing any prohibitive commandments. He also need not create a love of God in his heart, which would motivate him to bind himself to him through fulfilling the positive commandments through Torah study, which equals all the other commandments together. In short, we're being introduced to a character here who is frigid nature, doesn't care for materialism, is totally really just enjoys doing the right thing, is very happy ticking all the boxes, following all the rules. Very easy for this person to just do what God wants. So why is this person not a tzaddik? Because we said a tzaddik is inspired. This person is not inspired. They're not passionate. They don't love God. They're not excited by Judaism. But they're just that kind of person that naturally it's kind of easier for them to do the right thing than to do the wrong thing. So they're technically a Beinoni because they never do anything wrong. But is that what we're striving for? And the Tanya therefore describes this person as someone who is lo avado. They are not a servant of God. Meaning they're doing the right thing. They're not actually serving God because they're doing it due to their nature. Judaism doesn't want us to be passionless. Judaism doesn't want us to be these, cold, unfeeling, robotic people who are just ticking a bunch of boxes. We're supposed to serve God with passion. We're supposed to have passion. Now, for most of us, our natural passion, we wake up in the morning, we're like excited to like go to a certain restaurant, to go on a certain vacation, or, close a certain business deal. Most of us don't naturally have that passion to love God. I want to go sit and, pray. I want to go sit and do all these mitzvahs, right? We have to work with our passion. We have to harness that passion and say, wait a second, I know you want to do this, but actually you need to do this or you need to do that. But not having passion and just doing the right thing because it comes naturally to us is also not an ideal. And the Tanya is going to actually portray to us two people who are passionless and still doing the right thing. One of them is someone who it's their nature. We probably all know someone like that, so, who by their nature is very studious. Maybe they're a bookworm. Maybe they're just, socially awkward and like don't really, most people, I would say, most people who we know still, even if maybe they're a bookworm and love to sit and learn, they still have their certain desires and stuff. But let's assume that there is somebody who's really just, cold by nature and just very easy for them to do the right thing. That's person A, who's like the passionless Beinoni. The type B of the passionless Beinoni that the Tanya describes is someone who it's not their nature, but it's their nurture. Meaning this person has become accustomed to praying every morning for an hour, let's say, that even if it's not their nature, it's just second nature to them. It's just not something they even think about. This is a person perhaps who was raised eating only kosher, that breaking the laws of kosher, it's not even something they struggle with. It's just whatever. It's just easy. And the same is with maybe with Shabbat or with other things. It's something that they grew up with or they did for so many years that they don't need to love God in order to keep Shabbat one week. It's just easy for them. What about this person? And the Tanya says this is someone who's described as lo avado. They're not a servant of God. They're not actively serving God. Because in order to truly serve God, we need to be breaking our nature. We need to be going beyond our nature. We need to know what our glass ceiling is, and then we need to break it. So I know we've said this example before, but in the example of, we have two ladders, and one person is standing on the 99th step of the ladder. Let's say the ladder is all mitzvot and Jewish observance, right? Somebody's on step 99, and somebody is on step 2. Which one of them is doing better in their service of God? According to this chapter in Tanya, actually, you need to know where they were yesterday. If the person who's on step 99 was on step 100 yesterday, and the person who's on step 2 was on step 1 yesterday, then the person on step 2 is doing better than the person on step 99. Because it's not so much how much we do, it's about the effort that we're putting in. Now, it's a tricky one because sometimes people take this line and they say, well, it's how much I try. It's not how much I do. So it's okay because I wasn't raised with X, Y, and Z. It's okay that I don't do all of that. That only holds true the first few times. Meaning if someone, let's say, wasn't raised keeping Shabbat at all, and they take upon themselves to start lighting Shabbat candles every week on time, and it's a lot of effort, they get tons of credit. That is worth way more than someone who grew up keeping Shabbat their whole life and is keeping a whole entire Shabbat because they're not putting in any effort. The person who wasn't raised with it and is not used to it and now is lighting candles on time every week, they're putting in a lot of effort. That is avado. But after a certain amount of time, it's going to become natural to the second person. So you can't sit back and say, well, because I started on step 1 and now I'm on step 3, I'm okay. As soon as I get used to step 3, as soon as I become comfortable on step 3, I'm no longer working for step 3. Now I need to find step 4 and work towards step 4. Meaning this is where we say that, yes, we're aiming to do all the mitzvahs, But of course, effort counts. Effort is so important. Not effort counts in order to, that we can't, it's not like we can't take on everything at once, but we also can't dismiss everything we're not doing because, hey, that's too much for me. Right? Meaning like you could have two different people. Both of them are, let's say if pretend that Judaism and mitzvahs were a ladder, right? It's not quite like that. But let's say both of these people are on step 5, right? They're keeping a certain amount of things. There's a lot of things, 95 steps that they're not keeping. One person says, I'm on step 5. It's difficult for me. I wasn't raised with this. I'm not used to this. I'm working really hard to be on step 5. Hopefully by next year I could get to step 6. Hopefully in 10 years I could get to step 7. Whatever it is. I'm working at my own pace. I'm constantly trying harder and striving higher. The second person says, well, I know I started on step 1. And now I'm on step 5. Good for me. I get my certificate and I don't have to work anymore. I should always be happy to be on step 5 because I started on step 1. That's not the Jewish approach, right? We have to know, we have to be real with ourselves of where we are, and we have to constantly be striving higher. And I have to be honest, and I have to say, well, I'm now at this and this step. This is still very difficult for me. I'm not ready to take the next step, but I always need to be looking at myself to say, well, when am I ready to take on another step? When am I ready to keep moving forward? And this is where the Tanya says, you hear a lot of times, I definitely hear this, I meet these people who are, they're so religious, they were raised so religious, but like they do so many awful things. I would think that someone who's religious would behave so much better. And that's when you have to realize that someone who's religious, right? They're not necessarily religious because it's something that they chose or they're working on. If it's something that they were born into, for them, being religious is as natural as for someone else it is to be not religious. Meaning the fact that someone is, what we call religious doesn't mean that they're have an active relationship with God, doesn't mean they're working on themselves. We shouldn't be surprised by what they do, just like we're not surprised by anything anyone else does. At some point, a person needs to look at themselves and say, hey, I was raised with, A, B, and C. Now I need to start making it mine and working on myself. So, to sum it up, somebody who is seemingly doing a lot of Jewish things, not necessarily are they at a higher level than someone who's not doing as many things. Chapter 15 is telling us the avado, being a servant of God means I'm actively working on it. So if I'm a naturally, dispassionate person who doesn't care about things, well, let me find the thing that's hard for me and let me work on that. And for the person who's very passionate and their, thoughts and feelings are all over the place, and for them, doing one little step is like so much effort, let them work on that. God looks at the effort and he wants to see what the effort is that we're investing. And the Tanya then goes out, the quotes from the Talmud, 2 very interesting examples. One example the Talmud gives, when the Talmud is describing someone who, because we had the quote from, I think it's from the book of Micah, the quote about someone who serves God and doesn't serve God. So the Talmud says, you know what an example is of someone who serves God and doesn't serve God? That's like someone who studies who studies the Torah or the portion that they're studying 100 times versus 101 times. You have to realize that in the days of the Talmud, in the days before the printing press, before so much of Torah was written down, a lot of the oral Torah, or most of it, was studied orally. And teacher to student, parent to child, they would give over the Torah study, and the custom was to study everything 100 times to achieve mastery. So when you were studying a Mishnah or some concept in Torah, you had to study it 100 times. That was the norm. So the Talmud says, someone who studies it 100 times, they're not working very hard. They're just doing the norm. Someone who studies it 101 times, they just studied it one extra time. But you know what? Because they broke their nature, because they went beyond the norm, that's a person who's truly serving God. And the Talmud there gives an example of someone who is paying for to rent a donkey. I guess the equivalent of modern day Uber. You know, sometimes let's say you rent a car or an Uber, and they'll say, well, the first 10 miles, up to 10 miles is $10 for the ride. Once you go past 10 miles, it's an extra $5 a mile. It's like, wait a second. If it's $10 for 10 miles, then 11 miles should be $11 and 12 miles should be $12. Why is it that as soon as I reach a certain threshold, suddenly the price jumps? So the Talmud says when it's referring to, horses and donkeys that people were renting, it says this animal is used to taking short trips. And so for short trips, up to a certain amount, up to a certain distance, it's going to be the same price. You want to take it for 11 miles? That means you want this animal to go beyond what it's used to. That's already going to cost you more. There is a recognition that there's the norm, what we're used to, and then there's pushing beyond our limit. And that's what the Tanya is comparing this effort to. Meaning, I could be doing 610 mitzvahs, but I'm not actually working hard to do them because I've been doing them my whole life and I could do them in my sleep and I don't need to be very inspired to do it. For me to do the 611th mitzvah, that could be the whole difference. That could be a huge amount of effort because that's the one mitzvah I didn't grow up with. And for someone else who perhaps grew up only keeping 3 mitzvahs, for them, keeping the 4th mitzvah is what changes their status to be a servant of God. The idea is find what my glass ceiling is and break through it. And this is, we said before, why don't we take an oath before we're born to be a Beinoni? Why is it be a Tzaddik and don't be a Rasha? Because we're understanding that a Beinoni is not something that's very stagnant. It's something that's always changing. Whereas a Tzaddik is very easy to classify. It's someone who's always inspired. They're always going to do the right thing. A Rasha is someone who's always failing. A Beinoni, it's a journey. It's someone who's always working on themselves to do the right thing. And their own journey is going to look different from day to day because maybe this week I've been working on, a certain mitzvah that's difficult for me. By the end of the week, I've mastered it. Not such a big deal for me. I'm ready to work on my next mitzvah. So even in being a Beinoni, my status will change every day or my actions will look different every day. But my common goal is I'm working towards a Beinoni. So we don't take an oath, be a Beinoni. We take an oath, be a tzaddik, aspire to the highest, but also know, don't let yourself go down lower than a Beinoni. Don't be a Rasha. Always aspire towards tzaddik and stay in that category of the possible man. Arlene, I know you wanted to say something.
Oh, you pretty much covered it as you went along. I was just thinking when you were talking about people who were born into orthodoxy and who doing mitzvahs are just second nature to them. And perhaps they're not the best people. Perhaps a lot of their actions you would not consider to be godly. I've heard someone say that perhaps those people, as opposed to being more religious, are more observant. Somehow religiosity makes you think about God and being godly, and observant, you're just following you're following what you've always been taught to follow, but not perhaps behaving in a godly fashion.
100%. And that's why I think, what comes to mind is a story of, I hope I'm not misquoting the story, but it was somebody who came to meet with a Lubavitch Rebbe, and he had been dating a woman for a long time who was not Jewish, and he was becoming closer to Judaism and studying more, and he basically realized that he can't keep up this relationship if he wants to do what God wants. God would not want him to marry this woman. And he came to the Rebbe and he said, I don't know what to do. I'm so broken. Like I'm faced with such a difficult decision. Like, I really like her. I can't imagine my life without her. But like, I also want to do the right thing and I want to do what God wants. And the Rebbe looked at him. And after a few quiet moments, the Rebbe said, I want you to know that I envy you. He said, you envy me? Like, why do you envy me? The Rebbe said, because I was never faced with such a difficult decision. I never had to make that kind of choice. That's a very, very tough choice. It's something that it's between you and God, and it's very difficult. I'm not going to take away from the difficulty of it. But I never had this particular challenge. So you have a very difficult challenge, but you also have the opportunity to overcome this particularly difficult challenge. And to me, that highlights, kind of like what I said, it's not so much where you're coming from. It's not so much how much you're doing. The question is, how much effort are you putting in? How much are you working on doing the right thing? And that's going to look very different for everyone. Now, again, we can't use it as an excuse to say, I don't ever need to keep, all of those things because I'm coming from, level 5 or whatever. But we do need to work on it one step at a time. We always need to be striving higher. So as soon as I'm used to something, as soon as I mastered something, as soon as I conquered it, now it might be time for me to take the next step. But it's going to look very different for every person. Some people, and again, this, goes back to, there are some people who will say, well, perhaps someone who's coming from a certain background, maybe certain mitzvahs don't apply to them because it's totally beyond their reach. It's totally too difficult for them. I would say you can't say, because every Jew is equal in that way that we all have Jewish souls. Our souls are all of us receive the Torah. The Torah belongs to each of us equally. The only thing I could say is maybe I'm not yet ready for that. That every mitzvah belongs to me as much as it belongs to you. Every mitzvah and every part of Torah belongs to all of us. We may not be ready for it now because right now I'm working really hard to keep up with, with level X, and I'm not ready for that, but I shouldn't dismiss it. I could always tell myself, I'm not ready yet. I hope to get there one day. And I would even argue that sometimes, talking about people who were raised with religion or Jewish observance, sometimes it's harder for them. When you think about it, somebody who was raised not observing Shabbat, and they, make a big effort, and now they are, lighting Shabbat candles or, observing certain parts of Shabbat. It's a big deal, and they get a lot of credit for it, and they should get a lot of credit for it. Somebody who was raised doing all of these things, for them to actually get to the point where they're actively serving God, they need to do so much more. They need to review all of their Jewish observance and say, what can I do even more to make it really mine? Not just what I was raised with, what I'm used to. And sometimes, very often, those are steps that, are not seen externally. There's something that they need to work on internally. They need to work on, between them and God. And, it all comes back to, we look at someone, we never really know where someone's holding. We never really know if this is a person who's, on level 2 on their way up, or this is someone on level 75, but they've been, on their way down. Everyone has their different personal journey. And as long as we are constantly striving higher and always looking towards the next step and the next good thing that we can do, and that person who's a passionless person who maybe is not tempted by things that most people are tempted by, they need to look at themselves and find what is difficult for them. Maybe for them to sit and study for, I don't know, 3 hours a day is natural. Let them study for 3 hours and 5 minutes. It's when it comes to, let's say, praying, right? I remember when I was in school, there were teachers who would tell us, try to spend, because we were praying every day. We spent a certain amount of time praying every day. See if you can get yourself to not look out of your siddur for X amount of minutes every day. And I remember going through this process of like, okay, today I'm going to focus on not getting distracted for a full 10 minutes. Do you think like, what's the big deal? You're praying every day for an hour. No, I was praying every day for an hour, but I was able to also think about a million other things while I'm praying every day for an hour. So focus for 10 minutes. And once that becomes natural and easy, then okay, now I'm ready to start focusing for 11 minutes a day. It's like when we start working out, someone who's never exercised, you can't tell them to start running 3 miles a day, but run for 5 minutes a day. When running for 5 minutes a day becomes easy, start running for 6 minutes a day, right? And slowly you'll be a person who never exercised can't say, I'm never going to get to the point of running 3 miles a day. I'm not ready for it yet, but let me inch my way forward and take one step at a time. And as long as I am, for someone who's never exercised and now they're running 5 minutes a day, I think they're doing better than someone who was running 3 miles a day and now they're only running, I don't know, a half a mile a day. Like one of them kind of totally slipped from something that they've achieved, and one of them is actually really working on themselves to get better and better. So now we discovered another element of the Beinoni. And what I love about learning about the Beinoni is that when you first introduced to the Beinoni, it sounds like, oh my God, that's like impossible. I can't be this person who's, always doing the right thing. But as you study about it more, the Tanya's explaining to us that it's not like this like level that I'm trying to get to and I can never get there. It's really about everyday decisions. Every time I make a decision, try to get into that Beinoni mindset. Try to exercise the Beinoni side of me. And yes, it takes a lot of self-control. At the same time, I need to work on remaining inspired so I can, keep giving myself fuel for it. And then ultimately, God cares about my effort. So if something is very, very hard for me, trust me, God knows when I am working really, really hard to do something that might seem so small. But as long as I'm working at it, that's the goal. Always be working. Any thoughts or questions? All right. Well, have a great week.
I was just going to say, I
Yeah.
think that's an important way to go through life in any category of your life, not just your religion, your how much you pray, if you're, not just those, but in every area of your life, you're kind of following that and saying, I want to be one step, one bump higher, kinder, more compassionate, more loving, more
100%.
understanding, more, you could say it for anything, not just
100%. And I would say even more than that, talking about the nature. Some people by nature are very compassionate people. They just naturally like love talking to people and love helping people. So what does effort look like for this person? For this person, maybe it's spending a little more time helping, or maybe it's helping that one person that they really don't enjoy helping, right? Everyone else helping them is no big deal. Now they're going to work on helping, that person that's less exciting to help. Someone who by nature, loves to host and loves to make people feel good. What's effort going to look like for them? And then on the flip side, somebody who really, really doesn't like talking to people. And even picking up the phone to ask someone how they're doing is a huge amount of effort for them. So again, take it one step at a time. Know yourself and know what is considered effort for you. And for each of us, that's going to look different. But we can't rely on the fact that, we all have our different personality types. And we can't rely on the fact that, oh, since I'm, already such a friendly person, I don't have to work on that department. No, you have to work on that department too. But effort for you is gonna have to you're gonna have to take it a step further than someone who's not naturally, outgoing and friendly in that way. And it applies to all areas. Yes, the so to speak religious things like prayer and mitzvah observance, and also the interpersonal things of being kind and caring and helpful. Someone who's, used to giving a certain amount to charity, it's just easy. They don't have to think about it. It's just so natural for them to give a certain amount. Give a little bit more. Right? Like when you write the check, like, obviously assuming that you can afford it, but there's the amount that you can very easily and comfortably afford, and then there's the amount that, like, let me give a little bit more than what I'm comfortable with. That's pushing myself. So yeah, for sure, in every single area of life, we always have to see, how can I push myself?
Have a wonderful trip.
Thank you. Have a great week,
Safe.
everybody.